Hello everybody, this is ManuS and welcome back to another Legends of Runeterra deck tech. Today I want to talk to you about the awesome Fizz Twisted Fate deck that I have been having a lot of success around the top 100 lately, and want to tell you a bit about where it's coming from, because I didn't build it myself, and also why the card choices are in the deck the way they are, and why I think the deck is built optimally the way it is, and so on. And then I'll take it to battle in higher ranked masters to show it in action and show you how to pilot it. It's one of the harder to play decks, if not the hardest to play deck in the game right now, I would argue. And it's super fun and super rewarding. Anyway, before we do that, you know the drill. Hit the subscribe button down below. Turn on notification icon to not miss out on future content. And if you want to catch me just climbing the ladder, trying new decks, and talking to you guys, make sure to check out my Twitch and join my live stream, usually during the week, Monday to Friday. You can find all further information in the description down below. And now let me take you away to today's sponsor before we get into the deck. Today's video is sponsored by NordVPN, one of the leading virtual private network providers out there. A virtual private network keeps your data secure and yourself anonymous while using the internet. NordVPN comes with super fast servers, allows you to unlock your favorite entertainment websites like Netflix. They provide a 30-day money-back guarantee. They also have an included cybersecurity suite, which acts as an ad blocker to boot. They don't lock any of your data, provide a 24/7 customer support, and you can use it on up to 6 simultaneous connections, so one account covers most or all of your electronic devices. And most importantly, they don't have any bandwidth limit, so you can use it non-stop without it getting throttled, which is particularly important for heavy users like us. It also won multiple awards and comes highly recommended by top technology experts. So if you're still surfing online without a VPN, now is the time to change that. Get NordVPN now, 70% off for a 3-year plan, including 1 month extra for free using the code ManuS or the personalized link in the description down below. And now on to today's content. Alright, so onto the deck. This deck is a bit different from a lot of other decks, and I think a lot of people might misinterpret or misunderstand the deck. First of all, for anyone that is coming from a Magic background and has played Magic, this deck is much more resembling something like Delver, or especially Miracle Grow, like way back, if you have played at that time. It's basically sort of like a tempo proactive deck that plays some really good threats, generates a lot of card advantage, and while kind of controlling the pace of the game to an extent, tries to kill the opponent while delaying them from doing their thing, basically. This obviously works a bit different in this game than it does, for example, in Magic, because we have very different tools, but the core approach to the deck is very similar, despite a lot of the tools being seemingly quite different, or concentrated in very few cards. So first we gotta talk about the units. So the deck has 2 1-drops, Fizz, which is much more than a 1-drop. Fizz often gets a bad rep because he doesn't fit that well into a lot of decks, which makes him a bit awkward seeming as a champion, but in the right decks Fizz is really good. He has elusive, he's basically unkillable. There are very few things that can kill him, basically challengers, and one of the very few sweepers, mostly ruination, once he's leveled or buffed. Stuff like Whale doesn't do anything anymore. Avalanche isn't really seeing play, but even if it would, once you put Pocket Aces on a leveled Fizz or suit him up, he doesn't die to any of those anymore either, which is one of the core pillars of the deck. So yeah, Fizz is super amazing. Deck is really good at leveling him. And then we have Jagged Butcher, which is pretty important for the deck actually to play offense-defense. Since if you play him turn 1 with a warning shot, that means he's a 3/3, so he beats all other 1-drops. The best 1-drop against Butcher on turn 1 would be Rearguard, but since Rearguard got nerfed, Rearguard is so bad that it doesn't really see play anymore, so all 1-drops just get bricked by Butcher. That also applies to a fair share of 2-drops, stuff like War Chefs and all that stuff. disciples and so on. So especially against aggressive decks, that is very important. But even against non-aggressive decks, it's pretty good because you basically, if you have a tech token, the opponent starts the game on 16 health, which is really not that much. Then we have Black Market Merchant, just a really good value 2-drop. It's not that great at attacking, it's decent at blocking, like it trades with 1-drops and with the more aggressive 2-drops, like the 3/2s and stuff like that. But yeah, it replaces itself and generates some tempo, so it sort of effectively only is a 1-cost 2/2 that draws you a card, so to speak. It draws you a card from your opponent deck, which can be an upside or downside, depending. But the synergy with Pilfered Goods is what makes it really powerful, generating a lot of sort of virtual mana, which is really, really good. And even if you draw a bad card from the opponent, it doesn't really matter that much in a deck with Rummage and pick a card, for example, to just turn them into real and more useful cards from your own deck. The other 2-drop is Coral Creatures. The card might seem kind of trivial and weak, but it does a whole lot in the deck. Once again, just like Black Market Merchant, it's pretty tempo efficient because it's effectively a 1-cost card because of the attune. As a 1/2, it blocks some small stuff. It lines up decently with something like Pocket Aces, also turning it into a critical 3/3. That's another line that sometimes comes up, where you just turn 2 Coral Creatures after you drew a Pocket Aces that cost 2, and then Pocket Aces onto Coral Creatures to make it a 3/3 to give you some offense-defense capabilities. The fact that this gives you a 1-cost spell is really good. First of all, there are a decent amount of 1-cost spells. Let's look at them in these combinations. Jailbreak, very decent. Jettison is a plank. Jury Rig is fine, especially with the Rummages we already have. Mushroom Cloud's really bad, so Jettison and Mushroom Cloud are the 2 really bad ones. Parlay is pretty nice in a lot of cases. More Rummages is always good. And Yebin Wand is also very solid. So those are the 1-cost spells we can get. Oh, and Counterfeit Copies is another bad one, I guess. So there are like 3 kind of badish ones. The other region combinations where Coral Creatures is better, like in Bilgewater Freljord, it's probably best. There's only one bad option, which is Jettison in Bilgewater Freljord. But yeah, we gotta go with what we need, which is PNZ. So this provides us with cheap spells to protect Fizz, to level up Fizz. It protects us with additional free cards for Rummages and Picker cards, or just some minor tools like Parlay or Yebin Wand to help with board control a bit. And sometimes it's just kind of like a house spider. You play a turn 2, get a jailbreak, play a jailbreak, and then you get 2 bodies for like 1 card and 2 mana, which is also pretty good, as we all know. So there's a lot of flexibility and a lot of like power hidden in it, and every burst spell you get is great to protect Fizz. It's also a great target for suit up, not just Pocket Aces. So you have like 6 cards you can draw on turn 2 to drop Coral Creatures, play it on them, make it a 3/3 or 4/4, which is actually pretty good, and some of the many ways that deck can play out and can win games. I've done many like Coral Creature beatdowns as a 3/3 or 4/4 on turn 2, for example. Then we don't have any 3-cost units, but we have 9 4-cost units. The other card that's the deck sort of has 2 hearts, Fizz and Twisted Fate. There are some matchups where Fizz is the go-to because they are removal heavy, like especially against reactive decks. Fizz is sort of your main game plan because they can basically not kill him, they can't really block him usually. So because these reactive decks usually don't have elusives, or like only one sort of 2/2 elusive sometimes, which you can manage with your buffs. And then there are the decks that don't have a lot of removal and usually have a lot of units, where Fizz as a plan might be a bit too slow and fragile, and they might run you over. That's where Twisted Fate comes in, because they will have a hard time dealing with Twisted Fate, and this deck is very, very good at leveling Twisted Fate. Like plenty of times, since you don't have a turn 3 play, your turn 4 will be Twisted Fate, blue card, get the third spell mana, play pick a card, next turn, draw 3 cards, and your Twisted Fate is already at 5 out of 8, and then you just level him that turn and go nuts and win the game from there. And that's a large portion of games against sort of proactive unit heavy removal light decks. And even if they kill it, the deck draws so many cards that it's often the case that you find the second Twisted Fate. The second Twisted Fate after they killed the first one, and then they won't have an answer anymore because they often only have like one removal in the deck and no card draw. So Twisted Fate number 2 can take over, which is also why you want to keep Twisted Fate in your opening hand in most matchups against the like very removal heavy like P and Z controlling decks. You probably want to focus more on like an aggressive early game, since Twisted Fate is almost certainly gonna die and there's not a lot you can do to protect him usually. And Fizz is what matters more in those matchups anyway. But in a lot of matchups, Twisted Fate is a must keep in your opener. Then we have Yordle Grifter, just solid synergy with Black Market Merchant and Twisted Fate, because it's also something that draws cards. It gives you more warning shot, which is good for Black Market Merchant, Pilfered Goods, and just to keep Fizz alive without keeping mana open, which can be very critical. Also, it generates 2 cards for free, which is great with a deck that plays Rummage. So this is sort of a 3/3 Campunk Pickpocket in this deck, because the deck also is only splashing 6 P and Z cards, so it's very reliable to allegiance, which is very important in this deck, unlike in some other decks that play him with looser allegiance numbers, because it's not that important and decent without that. So yeah, basically this is a 3/3 Jump Wump in this deck that gives you 2 notably better cards than Jump Wump does, and therefore loses 1 attack point, which is totally fine. So that's kind of how you want to look at this guy in this deck. And last but not least, we have Zap Sprayfin. Since the deck, like I said, has a plan of Elusive Beatdown in a fair share of matchups, either to support Twisted Fate, because he can control the game, but he cannot end the game that well, or because you're facing like a matchup where that's like the main game plan, or your draw just develops in that way. And then you have Fizz and Zap Sprayfin to put your pocket aces and your suit ups on and create some pretty good elusive threats. Also, it's effectively a 3-cost 2/2 elusive, which is pretty nice thanks to the attune. And also, it's basically a sort of worse Shadow Assassin. And Shadow Assassin is very good, and especially very good in this type of deck. So a weaker Shadow Assassin like Sprayfin is still pretty good. And yeah, there are solid spells to draw usually, and a lot of them generate extra card advantage, or are like 2-cost buffs you can put on Sprayfin right away. The worst you can sometimes draw is a Warning Shot, when Warning Shot doesn't do a whole lot for you. But even then it generates a card, and like I said, we have picker cards and rummages, so we can turn all these sort of weak cards into cards from our own deck that then generate more advantage. So now that we talked about the units, let's talk about the spells and their use. Like I already said, Warning Shot is actually really good in this deck and pretty important. It's important to allow you to play turn 1 Fizz and still protect him from stuff like Beam and so on in certain matchups. It allows you to play your Butcher turn 1. It allows you to play your Black Market Merchant without a 1-drop or without a tech token on 2. Same with Pilfered Goods. And since the deck also has Rummage and Pick a Card, like I said, in the cases where it's sitting in your hand and not doing anything, you can just turn it in, cash it in for another card. So this deck gets to use all the upsides and very little of the downsides due to the cycling effects in the deck. Then we have 1 Parley. This is the 1 card I changed from the original list. By the way, the original list, which you see in front of you here, basically except for the Parley, was built by a guy named Ilias Botseas. He's a small German Legends of Runeterra streamer, for all I know. I'll put his name in the description down below. His Twitter is @IliasBotseas. If you want to check him out. He came up with a deck and hit Masters with it, tweeted it out, and that's how I got it. And thought it looked cool, tried it out, and was immediately impressed by how well the deck is built and how well it works and how complex and rewarding and enjoyable it is. So yeah, basically the original version had 1 Year Been Warned, which I can see why you would come to that conclusion because it draws a card, so it has synergy with Twisted Fate and stuff. But I think the card is very situational. The deck's units are not very good at challenging, and Parlay is actually pretty good. It's an additional source for plunder. Like sometimes you do nothing turn 1, turn 2, you parlay something and then play Black Market Merchant. It's also decent removal early on, because one of the biggest issues of the deck is very early heavy aggression from something like Burn, and Parlay kills a lot of their 1-drops. So Parlay just has been really good, and I've been very happy with that upgrade. But yeah, that's the only thing I could really change about the deck. The rest was already perfect. So mad props to Ilias Botseas for coming up with such a cool deck and building it and tuning it so well. Not sure if his first version looked like this already, or if he came to this version over time with testing, but it's really, really well built and tuned. And all I can say is I don't see and think that very often, so that's a big compliment of it from my side, since I'm usually very critical of decks, and there are usually some things that aren't quite optimal and could be improved and adjusted, but with this deck there just really wasn't anything other than that one-off slot. The other alternative to Parlay could be running a Pool Shark, basically, which is also pretty decent, but I liked what Parlay added a bit more overall. Sorry about that. Alright, so let's continue. Then we have Rummage. Rummage is very good in the deck for multiple reasons. First of all, it's a 1-cast burst spell. Second of all, the deck generates a lot of raw card material, some of them not that great. Warning shots, both the actual ones and the ones from Grifter, Core Creature, 1-cast spells, cards from the enemy deck that might suck. Then sometimes, I don't know, like a clunky suit up stuck in your hand that you couldn't use right away. Then there's the synergy with Pick a Card. You play Pick a Card, you draw 3 cards, you draw more cards in terms of mana than you can play that turn, but you get a Rummage, no problem. You can turn the fleeting Pick a Card cards into real cards with Rummage. And also, in the same process, draw more cards to fuel your Twisted Fate, which is another reason why Rummage is so good and important in the deck, because it's a cheap draw 2 that makes it so much easier to level Twisted Fate fast, which is one of the key components of the deck's success. And yeah, then we have Pilfered Goods, another cheap draw 2 with a condition to help Twisted Fate. Also, obviously, just raw card advantage, great with Black Market Merchant out, and also a burst spell, which matters for Twisted Fate triggers once he's leveled, and also to protect Fizz sometimes. And like I said, Pick a Card, very important to get rid of some of the lesser cards that you can end up with the deck, as well as being super instrumental in leveling Twisted Fate. Like Pick a Card, Twisted Fate are basically a package, and you just want to go like Twisted Fate, blue card into Pick a Card on turn 4 ideally, and then go from there. And then we have the buffs, Pocket Aces and Suit Up. Both of those cards are very good, especially Suit Up is amazing. I've been very impressed and happy with the card. It's a lot of fun. It's great on Zepfin, it's great on Fizz, it's very solid on core creatures. It's sometimes great to make Twisted Fate a quick attacking monster and or impossible to die to all the like DL3s and Culling Strikes and stuff like that. Pocket Aces is basically a weaker Suit Up, but also a bit cheaper if you don't use it right away, and it can combo with each other. So if you make like a 5/5 Twisted Fate, a 5/5 Fizz between Suit Up and then him leveling, you can put a Pocket Aces on him, and suddenly he's a 7/6 that's basically unkillable, and the deck is very good at triggering the elusive, so he will basically have elusive every turn and just kill your opponent really fast. So yeah, that's the cards in the deck. You want to play the deck basically to maximize Twisted Fate and Fizz, get damage in, draw your cards, level up your Twisted Fate, try to prevent taking unnecessary damage by chump blocking in the right spots and blocking with your buffs like Suit Up and stuff, blowing out the opponent and wearing them down and burying them in card advantage. And it works really, really well, and it's super fun and super rewarding. The deck has a lot of moving parts, usually makes a lot of plays in a single turn. So there's a lot of decisions to be made, and it takes some practice and getting used to understanding the deck and making all the right decisions and making them fast enough and so on, and getting a feeling for like the sort of different game plans the deck can have depending on what your draw is like. The plans differ heavily at times on what cards you're drawing and what you're facing and so on, but the deck is very adaptive. It looks like it's not very capable of a whole lot because it doesn't really have much interaction, but Twisted Fate alone does so much on that front, completely locking people out of the game. And since you have so many more cards than they do, you can trigger him all the time, draw even more cards, make it pretty easy to protect him with your buffs and everything, and it's going to be really, really hard for most opponents to take him out or do anything meaningful because they just have a flurry of cards flying at them. So yeah, I really love this deck. Have been doing really well on data with it. I hit top 100 with it on stream mid last week. My overall record on stream lately has been 19-6, which is really great. Like, it's a super high win percentage. I think one or two of the losses I might have even punted and potentially could have won. So I think there were like 1 to 2 losses that I could have potentially won where I played pretty poorly. Like on the last stream where I went 3-2, the first game I played really poorly and should have probably won that game. And in the initial 16-4 run, there was one early game, like the first loss, where I just lost to a matchup that is really good and just played very carelessly and died where I could have prevented dying and easily won. So that gives you an idea of how much better the deck could have even performed if I would have played even tighter and cleaner than I did. And I already did really, really well. So yeah, I love this deck. It's one of my favorite decks in the game. It's super fun, but you really gotta dig in deep, get a hang of the deck to reap results. It's not the kind of deck you just pick up and crush, because it's too unintuitive and complex for that. The biggest issue with the deck basically was burn, because that matchup was horrendous before. Like when you were playing burn every 2 to 3 games, this was not the greatest choice because you would lose almost all of those. The deck is really good against most decks, but burn or the same kind of like hyper aggression is a real problem for the deck. But outside of burn, that doesn't really exist. And new burn is a bit more manageable because Teemo doesn't hit as hard as rearguard, and you can block him and stuff like that. So I actually have won a couple of my games against burn. I think I faced burn like twice over those games and beat both, which was kind of lucky. I had really good anti-burn draws, but that's not normally the case. Normally you just kind of lay down and die, but now with burn barely being a thing, this deck can really thrive, and that's what I did with it on ladder, and it has been a blast. Alright, so you know the drill. Before we head into the games, make sure to hit the like button and subscribe if you enjoy the content. Let me know in the comments how you feel about the format and structure, background music, stuff like that. I'm still fine-tuning these things. All games in one video or game separate videos like in the past, and so on and so forth. And show the sponsors some love in the description down below as well. And I'll see you in a moment with game number 1. For anyone that hasn't been noticing, the playlist to the entire deck tech video with the deck tech in the games is always in the description down below, and you can usually find the next video in the series up here as a card after the video released. So I'll see you in a moment with the games. Stay tuned.